a major conditional use. And the second, 1804.080, is the general intent of the code. Staff response to those two code sections is that staff notes the proposed location of the food truck reduces the only dedicated on-site parking on the Sunwater property, which was approved under the 2015 variance that required a minimum of 5 on-site parking spaces be maintained as part of the required 30 spaces. However, staff feels the proposed new location benefits the spa businesses and will be safer for the public in regard to vehicle movements in the Sunwater lot than the current and existing configuration. The overall loss of on-site parking amounts to a loss of 4 spaces along the west side of the on-site parking area under the proposed configuration, which accounts for the food truck and the existing pergola, as shown in that previous image. Up next is the Plan Manatee policies that are found to be applicable to this request. The first two are under the Economic Development and Tourism section. And what it basically says is policy for the Economic Development and Tourism 1.1, business retention and support develop a collaborative, proactive approach with local partners to business retention that supports the growth of existing businesses. And Economic Development and Tourism Policy 1.2, diversified offerings. Support the attraction and creation of tourism and entertainment businesses that help expand current attractions, focus efforts on businesses. Under the land use sections of Plan Manatee, it was found to relate to 2 of the goals. Land use goal 1, which is to provide opportunities for a balanced mix of land uses to meet the needs of residents and businesses and support other Plan Manatee goals and policies. And land use policy goal 1.1, a range of uses. Strive for a mix of land uses that allow residents to live, work, play, learn, and conduct more of their daily business within the city. Monitor the overall mix of uses within the city over time. One of the requirements for approving a conditional use is that conditional uses shall not be allowed where such use would create a nuisance, traffic congestion, a threat to public health, safety, or welfare of the community, or a violation of any provision of the design guidelines of the city, city code, state law, rule, or regulation promulgated pursuant thereto. Staff had mild concerns regarding the safety of pedestrians and vehicle movements in the Sunwater parking lot, but feels the proposed location is an improvement to the safety and pedestrians and patrons of the spa and food truck, as it will allow for food truck customers and spa patrons to line up, order, and wait for their food and eat under the safety of the existing pergola. Staff feels this is an improvement to the current operation on the east side of the parking lot. Under the current configuration, the food truck customers are lined up and ordering in the existing drive aisle for the on-site parking area. The proposed location on the Sunwater property has space for the food truck to operate, and with physical barriers placed between the service area and the drive aisle will provide further safety. The parking and food service will compatibly operate at this location if properly managed. The remaining parking area on the east side of the parking lot is proposed to be reconfigured to allow the 1 on-site ADA parking space, which is located just east and in front of the proposed Tava truck location. The east side of the parking lot would then be reconfigured to allow an on-site turnaround area to allow the users of the ADA space to safely turn around and exit the parking lot facing El Paso Boulevard. If the request were to be approved, staff feels the lessened demand on the on-site parking area and proposed ADA space and turnaround area will further ensure the safety of pedestrians and vehicular movements on the site. Regarding the Public Facilities and Impact Report, there are no anticipated impacts to the water and sewer capacity. Patrons of the food truck will be accommodated by the use of the indoor restrooms located inside the Sunwater Spa. And additionally, the Tava truck is approved for use of 2 commissary kitchens in the area where much of the cooking and preparation occurs. Changes to the existing pedestrian and vehicular circulation is proposed under this application. The food truck will be placed in an area north of the existing pergola and will not impede any drive aisles in the parking lot. The proposed location is in an area where pedestrians and patrons of the business will be able to walk up, order food, wait, and dine under the safety of the existing pergola. Staff notes that food service is often associated with spa operations as an amenity. The spa operation itself does not directly offer this amenity outside of the Tava food truck, which has become a partner and associated use of the spa property, especially during the pandemic, in which the food truck service helped to supplement the spa's income during the unknowns of the pandemic and impacts of regulations at that time. During the previous 18 months, while the food truck has been allowed to operate at this location, staff has not noted or been made aware of any complaints or issues related to the food truck use on this property. All right, so getting into the relocation of the leased parking spaces in Hiawatha Gardens. As mentioned previously, variance 1504, condition number 3, provided an administrative approval to relocate the 14 leased parking spaces from Hiawatha Gardens, so long as the resulting relocation did not result in fewer than 30 spaces total. The planning department allowed the parking department to manage relocation of those spaces to on-street locations near the Sunwater Spa, provided the relocations maintained compliance with variance 1504 and the major conditional use permit, which temporarily approved the food truck use. The parking department relocated the leased parking spaces as follows. A little hard to see on the image there, but you can see along the business frontage on Washington Avenue, there are 3 parking spaces that were designated along that frontage, and then there are 11 spaces along the frontage of El Paso. The spaces relocated along Washington Avenue and El Paso Boulevard have been designated for spa use only, and signage has been placed to reflect this by the parking department. However, upon review by planning staff, it was discovered that the 11 spaces along the business frontage on El Paso were already used to provide credit towards the parking requirements approved under the previous variances, and therefore were not suitable for the relocation of the leased spaces in Hiawatha Gardens, as it resulted in fewer than 30 spaces provided. The city attorney has also called into question the legal validity of allowing staff to administratively approve the relocations, as this may constitute an illegal transfer of power. Next slide. Okay. Due to the issue regarding the relocations of the leased spaces and the directive of the city attorney, staff has configured the revised variance approval to allow the final approval to be performed by the Planning Commission rather than staff. In order to maintain compliance with the previous variances and agreements and to correct the error made in the administrative relocations, staff proposed that in addition to the 14 newly designated spaces along the business frontages on Washington and El Paso, additional designated parking spaces were required. The additional parking which has been proposed is to add an additional 5 designated on-street parking spaces at Memorial Park on the corner of El Paso Boulevard and Old Man's Trail, which is directly across from the Sunwater business. A little hard to see in the image, but there's a red square around those proposed 5 spaces there. 6 designated spaces will remain in Hiawatha Gardens, designated to the Sunwater Spa, and the newly designated spaces along Washington Avenue and El Paso will remain designated to the Sunwater Spa. This corrects the error of double counting the 11 spaces along the El Paso Boulevard business frontage and adds additional provided designated spaces than under previous applications and approvals, and brings the total to 25 off-site parking spaces provided. Under previous variance approvals, the actual number of off-site parking provided was 19 spaces, so it's an increase of 6 spaces total. Sunwater will still only be required to lease 14 of the 25 spaces now designated. So the spa currently is operating exclusively by appointment, and according to the applicants, there's no plan to change the manner of operation moving forward, even with the lifted restrictions. The applicants have stated the reservation appointment model utilized during the last 18 months and throughout the pandemic had proven to be a successful one, and there is no desire to change that business model in the future. The applicants indicated the current business model has reduced their parking demand, their actual parking demand, by more than 50% from the original business model that was in place prior to the pandemic, and that the current parking arrangement with the 14 designated on-street parking spaces, that's referring to the 11 along the El Paso frontage and the 3 on Washington, has been more than adequate to accommodate their parking needs under the current model without much use of the parking spaces leased in Hiawatha Gardens. This is also confirmed by the Parking Department and Deputy City Administrator Roy Cheney, who have indicated the spaces leased at Hiawatha Gardens have often been vacant or used by regular parking users not associated with the patronage of the spa. The applicants further indicated that the Sunwater Spa operation sees an average of 30 customers per day under their reservation system for 90-minute soaking sessions, which are scheduled in 2-hour intervals to allow a half-hour in between sessions to clean and disinfect the areas for the next round. They operate from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. 6 days a week. They're closed on Monday. And under Public Health Order 2028, which was enacted during the pandemic, the Sunwater operation was only allowed a maximum of 8 guests in the Tava House, maximum capacity of 42 guests in the Sunwater building, and the applicants have indicated that there is no desire or intention to increase beyond those capacities at this time or the foreseeable future, as the current model in which they have been operating the past 18 months creates a very peaceful environment of wellness and healing. However, despite the actual lessened parking demand for the overall business under the current reservation operation model, the city calculates parking requirements based on the proposed and existing uses and gross square footages of the structures. In order to account for the current parking situation and calculate the required parking for the Tava truck use on site, staff calculates the parking requirements as follows. So under the previous approval, this is for variance 1504, it only accounts for the spa use, which at 5,958 square feet, and requiring 1 space per 200 square feet, the calculation came out to 29.79 or 30 parking spaces required. This broke down into the 5 on-site required, credit for the 11 public parking spaces on El Paso, and the 14 designated off-street parking in Hiawatha. Under the current proposal, the parking demand calculation still maintains the same calculation for the spa, but with the addition of the food truck and outdoor seating, an additional 2 parking spaces would be required. That brings the total parking requirement under the code to 32 spaces. They are providing 26 spaces in total. That's 1 on site for the ADA space and the 25 off-site spaces as mentioned previously. They would be requesting relief from 6 spaces under that calculation. The existing parking lot is small in size, and the pergola and food truck will occupy 4 of the existing parking spots on site and allow for 1 on-site ADA space. The new parking calculation, which accounts for the food truck use and seating area, adds an additional 2 parking spaces to the requirement, which results in an overall request for relief from 6 of the required 32 spaces. It is these spaces in which the variance approval and relief from the requirements are sought. The criteria for approving a parking variance, the first one is the property has extraordinary or exceptional physical conditions, as stated in section 1832010. That do not generally exist in nearby properties in the same zoning district. The 2012 report noted of the 3 commercial properties in the immediate area, 2 being City Hall and what is now Hiawatha Gardens, this is the most topographically challenged. The slopes on the northern and eastern part of the site have been found to be in exceptional physical condition that do not reasonably allow for the significant expansion of any of the on-site parking. Redevelopment of the property reduced on-site parking and relocated spaces that were on the west side of the building previously to the redevelopment to on-street with the addition of more spaces. Even without removal of the western parking area, the property could not have provided the number of spaces needed to utilize the building's square footage. Staff further notes that while parking is calculated based on use and square footage, the business does not operate anywhere near the maximum capacity permitted by the state at 100% occupancy and as allowed by the building itself. As noted earlier in the report, the business does not intend to exceed the capacities which were allowed under the State Health Order 2028, which restricted this building to a maximum of 8 guests in the Tava House and 42 guests in the main spa building during the pandemic. The applicants have stated there is no desire to change this in the foreseeable future, as the model has proved to be a successful one in terms of creating the ideal environment for their overall mission of health and wellness. Staff finds the actual parking demand on the business operation as a whole is much less than what is calculated as the requirement based on square footages of the structures and proposed areas of use based on the stated business model. The next criteria, that the extraordinary or exceptional physical condition of the property will not allow a reasonable use of the property in its current zone in the absence of relief. Under the current parking requirements, almost 1/3 or more of the building would be unusable without the relief provided by previous variances and the relief requested under this proposed variance. The applicant was willing to deal with this when floodplain regulations required extensive expenditures to make the ground floor habitable space. Investment in upper-level building area was made to create usable space above the projected floor level. Once floodplain restrictions had been removed due to FEMA map revisions, it was determined that a more beneficial use of the ground level of the building was reasonable. The current situation deals with the placement of utility infrastructure that unfortunately impacted the already minimal on-site parking, and with site excavation that would have been very expensive but necessary for the 1 additional space. To address the shortfall, the applicant has proposed relief of these 6 required parking spaces for the on-site location and associated use of the food truck and outdoor seating area to allow the continued and successful partnership and operation of the Tava food truck on location at the Sunwater Spa property. Given the topographical constraints of the surrounding area and the fact there are no other alternatives in which to create further on-site parking, staff finds the request justifiable under this criterion. The next criterion, the proposed location of the vehicle will not create a pedestrian or vehicular safety problem when the following factors are considered: the speed limit, vehicular traffic volume, pedestrian traffic volume, sight distance, physical design characteristics of the sidewalk and street. There are sidewalks and good traffic pedestrian movement patterns associated with this site. Although El Paso Boulevard is a busy street, it is not as congested as Manatee Avenue, and staff does not anticipate safety issues or the need to provide additional public improvements. Next criterion, the granting of the variance will not have an adverse impact on the surrounding properties or neighborhood based on the following standards. Not be detrimental to public health, safety, and welfare, or injurious to surrounding property values and neighborhood character. Not be inconsistent with any plans adopted by the city. Not weaken the general purpose of this code or its regulations. Only be to the extent necessary to afford a reasonable use of the property. And incorporate visual barriers or screening existing on-site or proposed by the applicant, such as vegetation, opaque walls, fencing on which have a positive effect towards screening of the vehicle or proposed physical improvement. Staff is always concerned increasing parking competition will affect adjacent properties or the neighborhood overall. However, the Commission previously found the proposal acceptable, and staff does not see that providing relief from the requirement for 6 additional spaces in the area should have any impact on the surrounding properties or neighborhood. Staff wants to stress that the spa needs to manage their employee and patron parking to the greatest extent possible, and should provide parking instruction to clients making appointments or signing up for classes to ensure the designated leased spaces are utilized as fully as possible. And then the staff's recommendation looks a little hard to read up there, so I'll go ahead and read it into the record. Given that the proposed food truck operation has successfully operated at this location for the past 18 months with minimal impacts or issues related to the operation, staff recommends the Planning Commission find the proposal meets the requirements and intent of the municipal code and forward a recommendation to City Council for approval of Major Conditional Use Permit 2201 to allow the continued operation of a food truck in the Sunwater Spa parking lot, and further recommends approval of the associated parking variance 2201 with the following conditions. 1, the pergola shall be reviewed and receive a property improvement permit to allow the structure to remain in place. 2, visual and physical barriers shall be located to define the area of customer service and waiting along the edge of the drive aisle, adjacent to the food truck operation. These barriers should be attractive and may include planters or movable fencing or screening. Simply placing traffic cones or other such devices is not acceptable. Planning and parking staff would have the final approval of barrier placement and design. 3, no permanent signage other than on the truck itself is allowed. A-frame signage as allowed by the sign regulations may be placed at the edge of the service area. 4, approval is contingent upon the business owner meeting all applicable city and state regulations, including but not limited to the city's business license and compliance with sales tax collections and remittance. 5, a minimum of 1 ADA parking space shall be provided on site. 11 designated parking spaces provided on El Paso along the property frontage. 3 parking spaces provided on Washington Avenue along the property frontage. 5 designated parking spaces provided on El Paso Boulevard at Memorial Park, and 6 designated spaces in Hiawatha Gardens for a total of 26 parking spaces provided on and off-site. The variance allows any future building use if the calculated demand does not exceed the 32 required parking spaces. Staff further recommends the following findings. 1, that the representations in the application are valid and the criteria established under Section 1832010 of the Zoning Code has been met. 2, that the granting of the variance is justified and makes possible the reasonable use of the property. And 3, that the granting of the variance will be in harmony with the general purpose and intent of the comprehensive plan and the zoning regulations and will not be injurious to the neighborhood or otherwise detrimental to the public welfare. That concludes the staff report. I'm ready for questions.
Thanks, Dylan. That really was a really well done report. Thank you. Really thorough, really well done.
Alan has Alan?
Alan?
Dylan, I wanted to clarify. You stated that of the 20 of the spaces, 11 of them will not be leased; they will just be provided, and 14 or something will be leased from the city.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Does anybody else have a question for Dylan? Commissioner Armstrong?
Well, I'd like to add my commendation, Dylan, to Casey's. That was terrific, and I know that the planning department is operating under difficult conditions, so that's quite impressive. My question is, when these references are made to the foreseeable future, we can be certain that Sunwater Spa will make changes of some sort at some time. What would the city be committing to for the future based on granting this your recommendations?
So basically, under their current business model, their actual parking demands are significantly less than they were prior. And a lot of that has to do with how they are managing the reservation system. As stated previously by the applicants and other requests on the property, the change to the reservation system, it's beneficial to their overall business model in terms of creating a space for health and wellness. So the desire to amend that, at least according to the applicants, is not desired for change in the future. In terms of the city's obligations, it is an additional 11 parking spaces that were previously public parking that are now designated as part of the spa parking.
Thank you.
I have one question.
Commissioner Latimer?
Okay. Dylan, pertaining to condition number 1 or to the staff recommendation regarding the pergola, earlier I think you said that Historic Preservation Commission would need to weigh in on this, or that you could administratively approve it on behalf of them. Is that correct?
Yeah, so based on the guidelines, this falls under a shade structure. It's actually fairly similar to the images that are found in the design guidelines. It's also, the Sunwater Spa building itself is a non-contributing resource to the Lower Washington Historic Subdistrict. So an administrative approval would not be problematic.
Commissioner Reagan?
Thank you very much for the report. I have 2 questions that build a little bit on what other commissioners have asked. In the case, I understand that right now it appears that the reservation system works well, and that the applicants want to keep it because it's in line with their business model and their philosophy of doing business. Let's just pretend that in 10 years they decided that they were going to go to the open entrance and change that. Maybe they decided at that time, and perhaps with very good reason, that their business model had now evolved and that they wanted to go back to that. Would there be anything in this that would trigger that they would have to come back?
Yeah, so if they had another use on the property that creates a parking demand that exceeds the 32 required in the calculation, that would trigger a revised variance.
So my understanding is that if we approve this variance, it would be based on, in part, it would be based on the reservation system. If the reservation system went, they would have to come back.
Not necessarily. So basically, currently and under the previous approvals, they were actually only providing 19 off-site parking spaces. And with the 5 on-site, previously that was counted towards those 19 spaces that were provided. Under the revised variance request tonight, they would actually be providing 25 off-site parking spaces, which is an increase of 6 spaces overall, which is an improvement to what was previously provided, but does not offer a guarantee that the Sunwater Spa won't change their business model.
Okay, thank you. Actually, maybe I have 2 more questions. So, given what you say, when you're talking about how the business would be providing these spaces that would be required, some of which would be city spaces on the street, is it really accurate to say that Sunwater is providing the spaces, or would it be more accurate to say that the Sunwater and the city are providing the spaces that are required?
Well, it's hard to say. They were previously getting credit for those 11 spaces, even though they were public parking. Could you restate the question?
Well, it just seems to me that if they're not having to pay any kind of lease for the public parking, and you're taking that parking out of the pool for anybody to park in, that it would be more accurate to say, and I'm not saying that this in an antagonistic way, it's just to adjudicate what we're doing, that it seems that it would be more accurate to say that the business and the city are providing the required spaces that the code asks the business to provide.
As close to it as it can, yes.
And the third question then would be, did you guys in planning department think a little bit, think about doing something that we've done when similar cases have come, especially in the downtown district in the last 10 years, as I think you know, but some of this might have predated you, I don't really remember, but there have been a number of times when the commission granted parking variances because the downtown simply doesn't have spaces. But what we did was we had I don't remember if it's a recommendation or condition or a finding, but we would say that if the city ever in the future built a parking lot, that that the business would have to contribute fees in lieu of the parking that the city had given a variance for. Do you know what I mean? Do you remember those?
No, that's new to me, but I think certainly could be utilized in this request.
We actually put that, and I know that our chair will remember it, but we actually put that, we wanted to go forward right now, given everything else being in conformity, but we felt that if things change, so if this, and this is good to go on record for, we have a lot of businesses in town that have that in their approvals of the parking variances. So if the city did build a parking lot, you could go back through all of those parking variances, and those businesses would contribute to the building of the, not build it completely, but they would contribute financially fees that they're getting in lieu of the parking variance right now. So I don't know that that's necessarily the way that we want to go here, but I'm just saying that there's a precedent that we've done that on many occasions in the past.
Good to know. Thank you.
Thanks.
Chairman Dilbich?
Yeah, I was just going to sort of add on to what Tip was saying. I remember when we passed this initial parking variance, we reduced the requirement based on the creation of those parking places on the street. It was never, at the time, it was just, it was given credit with the understanding that they were adding to the availability of public parking in the neighborhood. And the intention, and that's why we gave them credit. We've done that with others in the past as well. If we go way back into the, Cliff House, Spa, the other Spa, various different places, we've done some calculations like that. So I think it's, maybe when we get to crafting our motion, we'll figure out some way to address that, because I do have concerns about the fact that these are now being designated for the spa. That's something that just came up in the last couple of years. They were in the past, yes, they were in front of the spa, but they were public parking. So, and I think it was fair at the time to give them credit for creating the spaces, and that's why we reduced the amount of off-property parking that we required. So that's, I think we can figure that out when we get to our deliberation.
Thanks, Ellen. Does anybody else have any questions for staff? Okay, then I'd like to call the applicant forward. I think you've been to this rodeo before. You know how to, if you can press the button and introduce yourself with your address.
Hi, my name is Lynn Edinger Harwell, and again, business address 514 El Paso Boulevard here. I live in Old Colorado City at 2721 West Uinta, though.
Okay, is there any additional information you'd like the commissioners to know?
Well, sure. Let's see. First I need to thank Dylan, mostly, I believe, in the planning department, which is very smaller now, on an excellent report that they put together. And I welcome and appreciate their support of what we're trying to do. So, because they really, as you see that, it's hard to, when you looked at that whole report, it's hard to make it all out. Some pieces of it are complicated. When you look into, what I don't have a presentation for, but, you have it in your packet, of what we're trying to do. Again, when we did our original application in 2020, because of the business model change, reduced capacities, loss of sustainable revenue, we had to get creative. And at that point, the food truck helped in our sustainability in 2020. We've kind of moved past that and are doing pretty well. Although the food truck has really become a popular place. And really the pergola, the importance of outside dining is still going to be relevant for years to come, I believe, as a gathering place, as what we look at, in preserving culture, community, common ground. It's an important thing, and not only with Manatee residents, but also with folks that come to the spa, whether they're coming from around the world, around the country, Colorado Springs, Denver. We get so many great compliments on the food and what we're doing with the food truck. It's really complemented the spa. I know there's two things we're going through here. I want to go. You've got my whole presentation here. When we talk about the numbers, let me just talk about the numbers per se, because I know that question's come up. In 2018, guest counts, we had 44,719 people. I've submitted those to the city too in an official format also. 2019, 47,000 guests, 397. 2020, of course, we were closed for 4 months. We went down to 18,108. That's when we changed our business model. 2021, our guest counts were 20,850, less than half of before the pandemic. The business model change has been revolutionary for us. We don't ever plan to go back to the way it ever was before. I can tell you in the last 6 months of 19 and the 2.5 months we were open in the beginning of 2020, we were turning away on weekends 200 to 400 people a weekend that could not even get in the spa, that stood around our circular stairs and tried to get in and outside, that really took up parking. And that has totally been eliminated. The model that we have works extremely well. we're really, really happy with it. When you look at the parking spaces, again, we combine this with the parking variance. The 14 spaces that we now have alongside the spa, guests could never park there before anyway, because it was always tied up with parking early in the morning, was tied up all day. Seldom do we ever have a guest that could park there. Now they can. As far as safety, crossing the street from whether it's Memorial Park parking or Hiawatha, safety is really good because they're parking on the same side of the street that we're on. And, with the waves that we call them waves, when we run, folks that come in every 2 hours, 14 spaces is all we need. And I really, really appreciate, and I know there's ordinances and the way the code is written on square footage, that there are additional spaces in this currently at Hiawatha and also in Memorial Park, but we don't need them. I would rather give them back to the city so they can create revenue from those parking spaces. I mean, you're happy to, I know you're giving them to us because of the way things are written on square footage and how we have to calculate parking spaces, but 14 is all we need. So I think that's significant. When you look at our guest counts and the reduction of that, speaks to that. Again, back to what I've always said about the food truck, it's a nice piece of business and people love it. It really supports Manatee. The pergola does. And even when we put that pergola up for the pandemic, I didn't even foresee the importance of outside dining as it's grown. People really like to sit outside and like to be involved with what's going on. It's comfortable to watch, the world go by and things going on at the park, and we're very, very happy. And to address your comments of if we change in 10 years, I would hope not. I mean, when we talk about wellness and peace and quietness, before, it got a little crazy sometimes in the spa with, people moving around, going from tub to tub, and we've eliminated all that, and we love it. And our guests love it. That's the really important part is they like having a private tub to soak in, and they have access to the downstairs floors with the saunas and the pools. And I don't see really any practical reason to ever change back again. I know, I'm saying that and you have to believe me, but truly, But, talking about those numbers, I think are important. That we're less than 50% of what we used to have, plus the people we turned away that we couldn't even get in before. That we are hopeful that you'll recommend this and go forward. I don't know how to figure out less parking spaces. We still, pay for 14 parking spaces, to the city, and we always will. But, I don't know that we need more than that. And I don't know how many businesses in Manatee have 32 parking spaces, actually. I don't know. You guys have to tell me that. Not many.
Does anybody have any questions for the applicant? Commissioner Reagan?
Thank you very much. And I too like the food truck, and I don't have to drive to go there. Given what you were saying, I do appreciate your response to my previous question, that you don't have any intention of changing, and I believe you. One of the things we have to consider is that circumstances do change, and we have to protect the interest of the city if they're in conformity with our code. I'm assuming that the recommendations that are in the overall recommendation by planning are amenable to you. Would you be okay with our adding a condition that if you did change that model of reservations, that at that point it would trigger your coming back for a renewal of the variance?
I have no objection to that. No.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Also, as you can see from the presentation, we have some beautiful renderings of what we intend that to look like, and we think it's much, with the food truck, if we move that to the north of the pergola, people will come into the pergola, order from the pergola to the food truck, and stay in that area. So it really helps with the flow, and I can't thank the city enough for allowing those spaces to come over to our side, just on the safety side. Because that's, we all know how traffic can be along there. We've added the stop sign there. We've added some other good things, on that street for to slow down traffic. But it still can be somewhat dangerous crossing, especially in the summertime when it's really, really busy.
Gloria?
Thank you. You have mentioned noise in your responses to the question, so I assume you get electricity from the Sunwater Spa and there will not be a gas-powered generator?
No, it's electric. Yeah, it's where it's already, it currently is connected.
So no addition to
No.
it? Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you. If you wouldn't mind having a seat, we'll call you back if we have any more questions for you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Dylan?
I just wanted to point out that Roy Cheney is in the audience. If you have more specific parking questions, he might actually be able to answer those better than I could.
Excellent. Okay, so it looks like this is the time for public comment. So if you're here and would like to come up and comment to the commission about this item, you're welcome to step forward, approach the microphone, state your name, your address for the record, and we'd try to limit your comments for each person to 3 minutes. There's a little button there you have to press and it'll make the thing go green. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not used to giving prepared comments, but knowing that I'm limited to 3 minutes and knowing how I've been accused of running out at the mouth, I'm going to give that a shot tonight. So I'm Jason Wells. I'm the owner-operator of the Armadillo Ranch, 962 Manatee Springs, also a resident at 106 Spencer Avenue. And I'm here on behalf of granting this application. I realize that a lot of it revolves around the parking issues, which are pretty complex. Thank you, Dylan, for getting so into the weeds on this, knowing how overwhelmed the the planning department is right now. And thank you all from the Planning Commission for braving a cold night to fulfill your civic obligation. So, like I said, I'm not going to comment, especially with limited time, much on the parking. I will say that given what I've heard, particularly tonight, about the reduction in demand and knowing when I actually served as city administrator and worked on the lease agreement as a three-party arrangement between Tajina Lamy at the time and the city and Sunwater Spa, that those parking spots that were dedicated to the spa were pretty underutilized at the time. So I'll make that observation, having negotiated and managed that agreement. And I also note from what I've heard from Mr. Ettinger Harwell that if he's willing to grant those back to the city, and this is a conditional approval, it would seem pretty rational that the Planning Commission maybe consider that as part of the conditional approval. So I will note that on the parking front, but really I'm here to speak to the outdoor dining element of this. We own a business that has really benefited from, I'm getting off my prepared remarks because I'm just so not used to it, so I'm just going to go back to that. In terms of the outdoor seating element of the Tava truck and what a benefit that's been, I think, to Manatee as a whole. As we all know, the COVID epidemic was a near, if not absolute, death knell to many of us in the service food industry. And given the strict capacity restrictions the state imposed, we were able to survive in large part to the city's prudent temporary allowance of outdoor seating. And I should also give credit to the Creative District for helping us achieve that temporary approval for outdoor seating. It was to say it sustained us would be an understatement during the pandemic, which we were not completely out of. So while it was temporary in nature, this allowance allowed us to enjoy at least one silver lining during otherwise bleak times for our industry. We witnessed more people spending time outdoors and socializing in our built municipal environment. And in limitless locations beyond Manitou Springs, the advent of outdoor dining, expanded spaces has become somewhat of a flower that grew out of a pot of dirt, so to speak. We've seen it all across the state and the country. People have kind of, you know, if one thing decent that came out of this is it got people sort of out of their homes, out of the four surrounding walls that maybe they would tend to socialize and dine and socialize in. So it was a great thing, and I think it's the construct that they've created down there and that we were able to have on a temporary basis was something that was, again, a benefit that grew out of a very dark time for humanity, I guess. So multiple communities have seized on the pandemic experiences to implement the establishment of permanent additional outdoor dining and socializing areas. And last October, Mayor Hancock in Denver triumphantly announced that the city of Denver would be permanently adopting its COVID-related outdoor dining options for businesses, and other municipalities throughout the state and the country and probably beyond have done the same to great applaud. So I really support whatever the Planning Commission can do to promote and continue the expansion of outdoor dining opportunities for folks. And if anything screams Manitou Springs more than promoting creative opportunities for our residents, guests, and employees to get outside, enjoy each other's company beyond the confines of four walls, I'm not sure what really would. So I really support this application from the perspective of the reason that it just is, it's an opportunity in a very limited geographic space in town for people to get outside, and you know, it's something I think we should all do whatever we can to promote. So thank you.
Thank you. You didn't do too bad.
I stick on the 3 minutes?
Yeah, like 4, but it's okay.
Thank you.
Is there somebody else who would like to come forward, speak? No? Okay, at this time I'm going to close the public comment section of our meeting, and we're going to go to general deliberation. So, Tip?
I actually quite like the proposed change of moving the cart and having the pergola. I think that makes a lot of sense. And one thing that we haven't mentioned, and I really appreciate the applicant, because when you came before this commission before, you were so open to talking about how to find a good way forward and to make things work. As some of you will remember, at that time, the Planning Commission worked with the applicant to, in thinking about a lot of the different factors, to actually have the cart moved over to Hiawatha Gardens. And the applicant was willing to go along with that, even though that probably was not the ideal situation. And I really appreciate that. Then the City Council was in its right to decide otherwise, and that's what happened, and that's what then moved the cart back to the Sunwater. That was not what we had recommended, but that's definitely in the purview of the City Council. I didn't have any problems with that. And in fact, I did think that there were some benefits to going in that direction. So to my mind, the City Council's decision already, how can I put this, created this kind of situation. And what the applicant is trying to do now is improve in terms of safety, in terms of fitting into the neighborhood, what was in his rights to do before, if you see what I mean. And so the fact that we're going to lose those handful of spaces for, that wouldn't have been an issue had the cart been at Hiawatha, but it's not. And so if the City Council had approved that, and this is actually improving upon what they had decided, I like that design change. That's what I would just say. I do worry about not only the long term, but the precedent about not having a clause in there about if the model changes, and I really appreciate the applicant saying that he would be comfortable with that. I would like to put that in. I don't think it would ever kick in, but I think that it's good for the city to protect its interest. I would like to hear from other people here. I understand that it might be that, I believe you when you say that they're not, all these spaces are not being used. We haven't had an impartial study of that, and so I do believe you, but I do wonder whether something about language of fees in lieu in the future. I don't even know if we'll ever have a parking lot in the city, but if that did happen, that might also be a way to protect the city's interest. That would also enable us not to set a precedent where the thing is that every business in the downtown zone has major problems with parking. Every time anybody wants to do business, and we want businesses here, so we're going to have to continue to grant variances. That's just the reality of our community and the nature, the geographic nature of the place. One thing we can do is if we build a parking lot, then in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, if we have put that language in and there would be some kind of contribution, I could imagine, I have supported that in the past. I don't know, the commission's a little bit different now in terms of composition. And we haven't talked about this for recently. That's why, Dylan, you haven't been exposed to that. So I don't really know where we are collectively on that idea. But I just want to put that out there for colleagues on the commission.
Tip, did you hear that Roy Cheney's here from parking? Okay, if you want to address anything about the parking utilization.
I really appreciate the work he does. Thank you. I've never met him personally, but I read about you all the time, and I really appreciate the work you do. I don't know whether my questions that much demand. This is thinking about hypotheticals, the future part, like that. So, but if I have a concrete question now, I would definitely want to ask that.
Alan, do you have?
Yes, I think this is I'm supportive of the major conditional use. I think it's been popular and meets the criteria. I think as far as the parking variance goes, I'm okay with that, although when we get to making a motion, I'd like to maybe change some verbiage. I'm concerned about calling out specific locations for the park, to meet the parking requirement. There's a requirement to provide 14 off-premises parking places, and that's fairly consistent with what we approved with the original development, and I think that, we should be consistent. I believe at that time, we didn't say specifically they had to be at the Tahini Alami lot. We just said they had to be provided in the neighborhood. And I think that's appropriate. I'm really concerned about tying one of our actions to specific parking places on Washington or El Paso or Old Man's Trail or anywhere else. So anyway, when we get to that, I'd like to suggest some modification for how we word that last thing. But other than that, I'm comfortable, and I'm also, I don't have a problem with adding the condition that Tip is suggesting about future considerations, even though I'm not sure we'll ever get there. It's not going to hurt to be consistent with what we've done in the past. Thank you.
Thanks, Al. Dylan?
And looking at the conditions from variance 1504, it does specifically call out the locations and spaces.
So I would just interject really quickly that even if that was in the previous variance, it need not be an amended variance. If you want to change that condition and say, just as you had worded, Alan, you're free to do that.
Thank you.
Okay.
Can I ask what the commission thinks? And I don't know. I mean, could we reduce the spaces? It seems like there's a lot of concern about dedicating more spaces to the business and reducing the overall parking for the neighborhood and other businesses. If the applicant is saying he needs 14 spaces and we're saying we're requiring 32, is there?
The good faith of this applicant, for me, is not really in question. But any applicant who asks for parking variance is always going to say that they don't need it. Do you know what I mean? Regardless of whether they do or don't, but it's going to be in the interest of anybody in the future who comes in front of us and the variance is 8 or whatever, they're going to say, well, we don't need that. So then we wouldn't then it would make sense not to have the language anymore, because we would just grant every variance. Do you know what I mean?
Right. Commissioner Armstrong?
Yeah, I was having a similar question, and I don't want to open a can of worms, and maybe Tip Reagan just answered it, but I also thought I heard Mr. Edgar Harwell say that if the number of spaces required was lessened, the city would actually get more revenue because it'd have more rentable spaces. Maybe I got that wrong, but yeah, I'm not quite sure when he says we only need X, why we wouldn't go along with that. I mean, I know you just addressed that, Tip. Maybe I'm just not smart enough to follow it, but.
Alan?
Yeah, David, I think we have to remember that we do need to follow our code. We can't just pull something out of the hat and make up new laws. It's pretty clear what's required, and I think we really have to be consistent with what's there. I believe that we may be having a much larger discussion about parking in general in a few months, and it may make all this moot. But for the time being, I think we really have to be faithful to our code and follow the code. And I think Dylan did a very good job of analysis and what he suggested. Although, maybe I want to change some of the wordage, the specific calling out of locations. I think the actual numbers are very consistent with what we've done over the years. So my preference would be to stick with that.
Casey, may I respond? Yeah, well, I'm certainly willing to accept that, and I see the logic, and certainly if we have one basic job, it's following the code. At the same time, part of the application tonight is for a parking variance of 6 spaces, and I would note that, I would say any business downtown, Manatee just doesn't have enough parking anywhere, but we particularly don't have enough parking in the downtown core. And that's why we're always giving variances in Manatee because it requires it, whether it's setbacks or number of parking spaces or whatever. So, but I'm in accord with you on that tonight, Alan, and not trying to at the last minute here make some revision to the parking variance request.
Tip?
I appreciate that, David, because I'm really of such two minds. If we were making new code here, I could imagine that at some point Manatee might be in the place of not requiring any mandated parking per business downtown. I could imagine that, given all the things that are said. I just don't think we can do it on the fly. And so that's, given what Alan was saying, this seems to be something that is on people's minds, and maybe people that are watching or here in the audience, or those of us on the commission, will want to go and participate in the more general discussions about what makes sense for the city in this regard.
Good point. Thank you, Tip. Is there any more discussion?
I just want to add that, I think generically, a business use like this with a square footage would require 32 under code. We know that. I think the applicant has presented a compelling case tonight that their specific use would warrant a reduction down to 26. So I do support that. However, as Commissioner Reagan mentioned earlier, businesses are flexible. We want them to be flexible, but we also want to be flexible too for the city. So I think that it would be advisable to have some sort of condition 6 that would say in the event that their use changes, they're not doing a reservation system, that we do get rid of this variance. That makes sense.
Thank you. So are we ready to move forward? Alan?
Yeah, if we're ready, I'll make the motion. I move to approve major conditional use 2201 and parking variance 2201 with the staff's recommended conditions, although I'd like to modify condition 4 to say a minimum of 188 parking space shall be provided on site. And let's see. I'm just counting it out. And 14 off-site parking spaces shall be provided that do not include those along the frontage on El Paso Boulevard.
Dylan?
And let's see, then...
Alan, hold on a second. Dylan's got a question.
Okay, sure.
Do you want to maybe just say 25 off-site spaces?
Well, no, because I want to be faithful to the original variance we gave them. We didn't say they had to provide 25 off-site. We said they had to provide X number off-site. I can't remember the exact number because it sort of changed when they added the Alabama house and when they added the bottom floor. But basically, we gave them credit for those along El Paso Boulevard. But the notion was they would remain public parking. And that's the thing I just don't want to memorialize and tie to our motion that those places are dedicated to this spa, because I don't know that that's sustainable in the long term when we start changing things. So I just want to I say those other spaces, the 14 off premises, or whatever that number was. It's not, it's let's see, it's 14, yes, 14 off-site spaces. And then, as Tip suggested, we'd add a condition 5 that should the use change, the applicant would need to come back for further consideration from the Planning Commission or from the city.
Perhaps using Justin's language about the reservation system in particular, I thought that the way you captured that was very good.
Okay, sure, that's fine. Can you maybe let Justin restate that?
So something along the lines of contingent upon the maintenance of a reservation system. Yeah. I mean, is there, do they have to certify that every year on a business license? That's a question I have. I mean, would there be an annual renewal? Could we have them every year state that we're still appointment only or reservation only? They're certifying that every year. Is that something?
So they are required to reapply for a business license every year. If you state that in the conditions of approval, it would be a part of that process.
So maybe you could say something like, should the business model based on a reservation system changes, then the applicant would be required to come back before the Planning Commission for a renewed variance request.
Okay, Austin's saying that sounds good.
Dylan, do you have that? Do you?
Yeah, could you repeat, please?
We'll try this here. Contingent upon the maintenance of a reservation system as declared on their annual business license renewal. Should that change away from a reservation model, the applicant must resubmit a new variance request.
Austin or Dylan, do either one of you have this motion written down so we can repeat it to make sure everybody knows exactly what it states?
I do in broad terms, but not verbatim.
In the past, we've used a recording of the session to capture the language.
I can get it off the recording, but what I have is approval is contingent upon the current reservation model. Any change to that reservation model will require a new variance request and application.
Yep. And I might add in like any substantial change to that reservation system, just so that if they're making minor changes to the reservation system, it doesn't negate their whole variance. So a minor change to the reservation system that could adjust their capacity, could adjust their business model, something along those effects.
Okay, so we've got the staff recommendations. Oh, sorry, since you have.
Well, I think this is the appropriate place to second the motion, but I'm not dead sure about that.
Okay, thank you. I'm just trying to clarify that the motion is now, it's the staff recommendations plus 4, which was the ADA place, 5, which was saying 14 spaces in general, not specific, and then the 5th being the motion that Justin just restated, that section.
With what the lawyer advised in terms of language.
Right, with the, okay. So we've got a, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Just quick, did we get the parking number correct as just restated? It's 188 on site, 14 off site, generally applicable, and then 11 credited on El Paso Boulevard. Is that correct? Okay.
Yes.
Excellent.
Okay, we're all good? Okay, we've got a motion and a second. Are we ready to vote?
One quick question, was that 11 on El Paso and Washington, or did I misunderstand that? Oh, and there's Alan's got something too.
Okay, Alan?
Yes, the way I would like to state it was a minimum of 188 parking space shall be provided on site. 14 parking spaces shall be provided off-site that are not along the frontage on El Paso Boulevard. Period. That's it. Those on El Paso Boulevard are part of the rationale. The fact that the applicant developed those places when they developed their property, they actually developed those places, and that was why they were given credit for a reduced parking requirement. Does that make sense? It seems like, basically, when we first did this, we said 14 off-site spaces. we said nothing about El Paso Boulevard. It was part of our rationale for not requiring 25 places at the time. We said, well, they're developing this parking along El Paso Boulevard that's, enhancing parking for everybody. So, we give them credit for that, period. But it wasn't part of the off-site requirement. And that's where we're getting confused now. We're increasing the off-site requirement, and that's what I'd like to avoid, if that makes sense.
I'm looking to staff. Does what Alan's saying make sense to you guys?
It does make sense to me. So basically the 14 off-site spaces mentioned would refer to the 3 on El Paso, the 6 at Memorial, the 5 at Memorial Park, and the 6 at Hiawatha. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah, well, it's the 3 on Washington. Currently, there are 3 on Washington, there's some on Memorial Park, and some at Hiawatha. But those are all the 14 spaces that are being leased by the applicant. And I think Austin gave it the thumbs up to that too. So.
Okay, it looks like Austin's thumbs up. We all thumbs up? Okay, shall we call the question? All in favor?
I'm sorry, Casey. I just did want to mention one thing before we vote. It was not only Jason Wells from the community who supported this, but there was quite a raft of support. And I think it's important to acknowledge that. And I think it's a reflection of the fact that the Sunwater Spa is just a first-class member of our community and contributes a great deal to it. So.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, that's unanimous? Okay. Other business? Looks to be none. Any notices of council actions or updates, Dylan?
Nothing to report at this time.
So I'm going to call for adjournment. Thanks, everybody.
Recording stopped.